Anyone who's had any formal training in rhetoric, and that's surely not most of us, is familiar with this triad: logos, pathos, ethos. Not sure I'm pronouncing those the way you're supposed to pronounce those in Latin, but I've tried. That's some fancy Latin for some pretty common sense ideas. As most of us could have explained even without any Latin, the persuasiveness of an argument depends largely on the logic of the argument first, right? Its careful use of facts and reasoning, the emotion evoked by the argument, and the authority behind the argument, which in turn involves the credentials and reputation of the speaker and the credentials and reputations of those cited or quoted by the speaker. So the logic part is logos, the emotion part is pathos, and the authority part is ethos. So these three things are respectively, again, logos, pathos, and ethos. Consider this argument, something I wrote a little while back. I'm going to show you this on the screen. According to a study by John Fenady, now a senior lecturer at the University of Auckland, and Dr. Nikki Hare, or R.A., however you pronounce that, an associate professor and associate dean at the same institution, some gay teens are more prone to commit suicide while other teens are more resilient. Using grounded theory methodology, the two researchers identified traits associated with resiliency, including positive social norms and conditions, high levels of support, identification with role models, and high self-esteem. It seems that bullying and degradation have the opposite effect. Take the case of young Lily McClish. Lily had recently come out as a lesbian and had been championing equal treatment for students of every sexual orientation at her school. Only 13 years old when she took her own life, she had been tormented mercilessly by 3 boys at the same school, who said to her, among other things, "Go kill yourself, white trash, kill yourself, and just die." We must take steps right away to support gay teens, provide them with positive role models, and create a social environment where gay teens are valued and respected rather than taunted and bullied. Now that, by any objective standard, is quite a persuasive argument. First of all, it's loaded with logos, logic, data, evidence, references to a study that appears to apply a scientific methodology to ascertain concrete conclusions using carefully observed and recorded factual findings. It's also heavy on pathos, with an accessible story about a young girl committing suicide. Unfortunately, this is a true story. There are too many of these stories. Complete with evocative words like young and championing and tormented and mercilessly. And of course, including 3 short quotes from the bullies that snap any good-natured reader in the forehead. It's also heavy on ethos, citing accomplished academics and 2 reliable sources, an academic paper and a newspaper. There's nothing inherently wrong with an argument that uses all 3 of these components, and a skilled rhetorician will, of course, try to do just that. Emotional appeals that flow naturally from logical premises seem fair enough. Let's not pretend that any sympathetic human is immune to emotional argumentation. I recall a quote from the late and very great Christopher Hitchens, who eschewed all things supernatural and preferred explanations based on science and utilitarian yet quite rigid moral propositions. He was asked once whether this fact and science-based approach to life didn't rob him of the experience of pathos. Now, the questioner didn't ask him quite that way, but that's what he was getting at. Hitchens said, in a contemporaneous and unrehearsed answer, quote, "The human species, the mammalian primate, made out of the dust of exploded suns, does have a need for the transcendent, the luminous, and even the ecstatic. I wouldn't trust anyone who hadn't felt this. It has obviously to do with landscape, light, music, love, and I think also a permanent awareness of the transience of all things. And the melancholy that invests all this, so it isn't just keeping happily at the sunset while listening to music. You're doing that knowing that it can't last for very long." Close quote. Indeed. Even the most logical among us is amenable, some might say vulnerable, to such ethereal forces as beauty, ugliness, pride, or pity. That's pathos. And as for ethos, it never did hurt Christopher Hitchens that he held a degree from Oxford and was a best-selling author. Although most, if not all of us, are susceptible to emotional tugs at the heartstrings, arguments based only on emotion are the most debased and often the most destructive kinds of arguments. Arguments in which the speaker fails to use reason are, after all, unreasonable. And unreasonable inputs, meaning appeals to emotion divorced from facts and logical structure, especially when made by buffoons or demagogues, short on ethos, will yield unreasonable outputs, unreasonable policies or behaviors. Watch a Donald Trump rally and speech, any one of them. Here's what you'll see. A speaker, Trump, who invents facts, abandons science and logical constructions altogether, and appeals almost exclusively to the anger and prejudices of his audience, which consists largely of like-minded clapping seals. It's not that the left in the United States is without sin. Ideologues are ideologues, and ideologues are always prone to rhetorical nonsense. But on the left, you will occasionally, if not often, hear arguments based on science, a calm and fair observation of facts with appropriate specificity, and comparisons and distinctions involving widely accepted historical events and phenomena. On the right, on the other hand, we've seen a wholesale abandonment of logos and ethos. That will be the subject of the next video. Facts don't matter, and conservatives have devolved to the point, conservatism has devolved to the point where it has produced, as prominent thought leaders, the likes of Sarah Palin and Donald Trump.